After defeat at Methven, Bruce is attacked at Dalry by the MacDougalls of Lorne and incurs further loss. He splits his party. Under the protection of his brother Nigel Bruce, the women are escorted to Kildrummy Castle.
In the footsteps of Robert the Bruce brings me to the Strathdon area. Shortly after Bruce's shocking defeat at the Battle of Methven in 1306, he makes his way to the Glendochart area with a faithful remnant that survived the battle. There, the MacDougalls of Lorne fall upon him and he takes heavy casualties in horse and men. It's there that he decides that the journey is too perilous and he splits his party. Under the guidance of the Earl of Atholl and his brother Nigel Bruce, the womenfolk, Elizabeth the new queen, his daughter Marjorie, his sister, they make their way to the Strathdon area. And this is the first stop in their plan to safety. This is Kildrummy Castle. One's imagination goes to work when you consider what that farewell was like. Bruce would see his brother Nigel for the last time. He would have been only too well aware of how perilous a journey it was going to be for himself and his family. His concerns for his wife, his daughter. It would be 8 long years before he would see Elizabeth again. And of course, as resilient a character as he was, he would not have known the outcome of his own survival. For he had incurred the wrath. King Edward I had raised the dragon, and the English were hot on his tail. Word would reach King Edward II, who was leading the army in this area. He met up with the commander, Aymer de Valence, and that army would assemble here, all around this area, in their thousands. And inside, Nigel Bruce and the Earl of Atholl would be defending Kildrummy Castle. Now, Kildrummy Castle was more than capable of withstanding a siege. And one can just think of the words that were exchanged from the high battlements between Nigel Bruce and the royal King Edward and his commanders here. It is said that they beat off attack after attack. And still Kildrummy, well provisioned, was standing strong. Somehow, when Nigel got wind of the English approach, he managed to get the womenfolk out of the castle safely with the Earl of Atholl. However, their freedom would be short-lived as they made their way north. Their plan to get to the Orkneys and on to Norway, where they would get safety. And as King Edward II approached and gathered his army in the foreground that you see there, Nigel Bruce would not know that outcome. Nigel Bruce was described as a knight of exceeding beauty, a well-liked man. But there would be none of that to cut any ice with the English force out here. When Edward I raised the dragon, it was a most terrible thing. And the consequences and repercussions of any opposition or insurrection to his authority would be dealt with in the most severest of ways. Here we now approach the Barbican, and it's a magnificent, it's probably one of the most beautiful castles that you will see in all of Scotland. And this is a Barbican, originally crossed by a drawbridge here. As we go, twin towers here. King Edward I actually visited this place several times. He was here with his master builder, the very man who had built Harlech Castle in Wales for him. And if you've had the pleasure, the opportunity of visiting Harlech, you can see, okay, on a much diminished scale, but you can see the similarity in imposing strength that Kildrummy would have been. There we are now, looking back on the gate. To the left and to the right would have been the guards' towers. As we wander up here onto the castle walls, you get a view of how that English army would have been arranged out there. It's unlikely that they brought huge siege engines with them at this time. They would have had a retinue of horsemen, archers, and foot soldiers. And because Kildrummy had the capacity to withstand a long siege, overcoming this place would need a different approach. Now we approach what is left of the great hall of the castle. This is where they would have had banquets. This is where they would have had grave meetings at the time of Nigel Bruce defending this place. He must have been stricken with worry. He has seen his brother Robert go into the wilderness as an outlaw. He's seen the women off. He's surrounded by the fiercest of enemies. One can only imagine the words that he had in this room, contemplating his options, perhaps in his own way, resigned to a fate worse than death. This is the chapel area, and being a pious family, Being a family of deep faith, I would think that prayer, in what must have been the realization that he could only hold out for so long, that he would have come into this place, that he would have knelt here and surrendered his soul to the Almighty. He would have said prayers for Robert, for Elizabeth, the Queen, and for himself. And perhaps, once he was resigned to his fate, he was resolved to make the best fight of it he could. This castle would not be won, or it would not be overcome by force. No, it would be overcome a darker way. Legend has it, folklore tells us, that the castle's blacksmith, one notable character named Osborne, they managed somehow to get word to him or anyone that they would receive a reward, as much gold as they could carry. So this news reached Osborne, the blacksmith, and the story goes that he put a red hot iron into the corn store, into the grain store, and set fire to it. It caught flames, and the flames spread in the wooden buildings. All inside here went up in smoke. Once the castle was overcome, once Nigel was captured, Osborne indeed did receive his reward in full, for it is said that they melted down gold and they poured the molten gold down his throat. If that story is true, you see a streak in King Edward II. For what I know of Aymer de Valence, the commander, that didn't seem to be so much in his nature. But if that was in King Edward II's nature, a chip off the old block of his father, Edward Longshanks, the Hammer, then it's easy to understand. After Nigel was taken prisoner along with his men, he must have looked back longingly at the state Kildrummy Castle was now in, put to the torch. He would have known his fate. They would have taunted and teased him of his fate, for Nigel was taken to Berwick upon Tweed. He was dragged through the streets, and he was hanged, drawn and quartered, suffering the full recompense of a traitor's death. Robert the Bruce would not know, of course, of the fate of Nigel, or of his wife and daughter and sister and Isabella of Mar for some time. King Hob, King of the Heather, would live as an outlaw for a while before he would gather himself, gather his quest, his purpose, and come back again. But these trials and tribulations that he gone through made the man. He never lost a fight after Dalry. He never lost a battle again. In fact, he would go on to be ranked amongst the greatest military leaders and kings who have ever lived. But the price of that power would be the heaviest that could be placed upon a man.